have your 10 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Kathy, for smiling. Holy cow. So much tension here. I've been on business in South America, enjoying the summer. I will. It's my prepared comments. We've met before, if you remember. Hired you once. I don't know if you remember. You don't. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Liam Weston, and I've been a resident in Loveland for over 20 years. 15 years ago, the City Council entered into an agreement with McWhinney Company. And contrary to what was presented this evening, the primary goal of that agreement was not about subsidizing employers. It was not about subsidizing industrial development. It was not about subsidizing apartments. It was not even about trying to grow the city's population. The Master Financing Agreement, or MFA, was intended to be a trade by the City of Loveland of $600 million in future tax revenues for 25 years with two very ambitious goals. One, add more retail development along I-25 that could eventually provide over $10 million to the city's general fund revenue above and beyond the cost of providing services to that development. And two, fund the $100 million regional transportation project that was enable non-subsidized growth. An ambitious widening of Highway 34 over I-25 was also the pinnacle of the regional transportation in that agreement, funded up to $40 million out of the 600. Since Loveland Mayor Larry Wall signed the MFA in 2004, the annual sales tax revenue promised has never been reached. Never. Most of the $100 million in regional transportation improvement funds were redirected and never spent on those promised projects. During the past 15 years, the MFA has been misconstrued, misunderstood, and even largely corrupted by disabling amendments voted on by various city councils. Despite failing to achieve the very purpose of the agreement, however, the subsidies continued to the McWhinney organization and the metro districts they control have only increased in time, even extending the date, and I forgot the date of the dead. It's now at 2048 or 49.
2048.
I come before you this evening not as a critic of the MFA, but as a defender. There's an old saying that says, if you don't know what road that you're going to go down, any road will take you there. Well, gentlemen, ladies, we're well down that road. The road of continuing subsidies, inadequate general fund revenues, and the very traffic congestion in this city the MFA was intended to prevent as Loveland grows. Last year, the Loveland Reporter-Herald published a commentary by Councilmember Don Overcash, bragging that the Centerra District generated $4.5 million in city sales taxes in 2018. That's only around 10% of the total sales tax revenue of $45 million. I have provided all of you an article, and I apologize, I didn't know the rules, so I had to give it to the city clerk, and she will distribute it to you tomorrow, from 2004 in the Reporter-Herald. I'd like you to take a look at it. And it forecasted the revenue and told the community what they expect out of the MFA agreement. And I'm going to read from the article verbatim. The payoff for the city would amount to $5 million per year in additional net sales tax revenue by 2008. By the time the tax expires in 2029, the city expects to reap more than $10 million of additional sales tax revenue above and beyond the cost to provide services. Then City Manager Don Williams estimated the city's cost of just emergency services in that area would be around $5 million a year. That means that the fourth year of the agreement, Centerra should have been generating $10 million in annual sales tax revenue to clear the $5 million hurdle. Instead, McWhinney's presentation this evening, slide number 10, as well as Councilman Overcash's commentary last year, bragged that they're only generating $4.5 million. That's 10 years after the goal of 2008. Centerra should have exceeded $15 million in sales tax revenue last year. Williams' expectation that by 2029, Centerra would be contributing a surplus of $10 million above above the cost of providing services is even further from reality. As you've all noted tonight, there's it's no longer growing, the revenue from the sales tax. So before I get into too much detail on the regional transportation improvements that were promised, I'll offer you my first evidence, which is the traffic on Highway 34. The traffic delays are not the result of the MFA from 2004, but the consequence of later councils allowing McWhinney, Centerra, to escape their regional transportation obligations under the agreement. Let me be very specific. The 2004 MFA promised, and in return for diverting 98% of the property tax through 25 years, reducing sales taxes by 40% so Centerra could collect its own sales tax, and even waiving $7 million in CEFs. that Centerra would invest $100 million in regional transportation projects specifically named in that agreement. The agreement also restricts those funds and escrow accounts that could be accessed by McWhinney from those accounts. So if those restricted funds were not spent, those monies are supposed to be used to retire the public debt that was incurred. According to the MFA, Centerra was supposed to fund the Crossroads and I-25 interchange at $20 million. Instead, as illustrated tonight on slide 7 presented by Centerra, they only contributed $2.6 million. The balance had to be raised from federal and state transportation funds that could have been used to improve transportation in other parts of our community. In April of 2009, McWhinney tried to get the Loveland City Council to allow them access to just over $10 million for their first regional improvement, which was the mandatory escrow account for the 34I-25 interchange. McWhinney claimed a secret Fortune 500 company wanted to come to Centerra, but all they needed for the mystery employer to come was to free up that money and not have to do the improvement that they had promised. When Loveland Politics revealed the secret Fortune 500 company was really Agrium, literally 7 miles east on Highway 34, there was a significant public debt backlash, and I believe it was Councilman Dave Clark whose vote they couldn't get to move those funds. You stood your ground, and the improvements proceeded as required. Agrium moved to Loveland anyway. I want to add emphasis that when McWhinney presents you with a false choice, either fund the incentive the way they want it or company X will not come, Loveland City Council stood its ground in 2009, and the dangerous clover leaves were improved with the money from the MFA agreement. In other words, the MFA worked in that instance because our city council at the time was willing to stand behind the principles of the MFA. Unfortunately, McWhinney learned from that experience, tried another approach, tried to escrow the account out of, or take the money out of the regional transportation escrow account. On July 9, 2013, Jay Hardy, testifying on behalf of McWhinney to this council, sitting right over in the table right here, said Kendall Parkway is not a regional improvement. Boyd Lake is not a regional improvement. But then disclosed McWhinney would seek to have regional improvement redefined in the MFA to access those escrowed funds anyway for local roads and regional roads that they wanted to spend money on. And they had already committed to spend money on. By November of 2013, Hardy was successful in lobbying on behalf of McWhinney to gut the regional transportation escrow account for local roads. The result by the vote of the council was not trivial. The pinnacle of the $100 million for transportation was $40 million that was supposed to be set aside by next year, 2020, to begin construction. It was only going to cover part of the cost of the final I-25 US 34 transportation improvement. It's Exhibit D in the MFA agreement. You can look at it. Construction was to begin, and as I stand before you today, I don't think Centerra has a single dollar put aside because they don't have to anymore under the changes that were made by the council. So your constituents are sitting in traffic every day because the council failed to preserve the funds necessary for the MFA that were already guaranteed in the MFA. You know, in the movie The Great Short, Mark Baum, the investor, the actual investor who predicted the mortgage housing crisis and bet shorts against it, said, one day average people are going to have to pay for all this, and they always do. He was absolutely right. Over the past 10 years, the city of Loveland has been seeking ways to address the shortfall in your general fund from Centerra growing and reaching into the pockets of average people like myself. So I humbly ask you tonight, how could you possibly be complimenting and celebrating Centerra this evening when just in your off-site meeting in January, you were talking about a 0.5% tax increase for all the ratepayers in Loveland on their sales taxes? What happened to that $10 million surplus that was promised? And I apologize that you can't get the article tonight, but you can read the article tomorrow from the Reporter Herald. I'm not making this up. It's in the MFA, and it was all over the newspapers what was promised. So the council has voted also to increase the PILT. So you're taking money out of the ratepayers' pockets of people trying to pay their utility funds and putting that into the general fund. And some years ago, CFAC, if you recall, also said there was a $5 million shortfall, so voted to raise fees, start charging for services that were prior free to the city to try to make up the shortfall. And lastly, our Thompson Valley EMS, as we all know, is increasing its fees on people for rides because they don't have the revenue that they depend on from the property tax as Centerra grows. With non-contributing parts of that urban renewal district, the taxes are not available for the service, so they have to find another way to get that money. The McWhinneys are political entrepreneurs. They've mastered the art of privatizing their profits from the public Centerra Metro Districts investments while socializing the losses by growing the public's debt. It's a textbook crony capitalism. It rewards the politically favored rather than those who provide what consumers want. Lastly, Councilman Overcash, You posted on Facebook yesterday that this is a partnership between McWhinney and the city, and tonight I think it was Mr. Crowder referred to it several times as this partnership. I refer you to page 76, paragraph 1715 of the 2004 MFA that says, no partnership, nothing contained in this agreement shall be construed to create a partnership, joint venture, or joint enterprise. You guys are only 9 people who have the constitutional duty to oversight. Please read the MFA and listen to your constituents, not the lobbyists. That's all I'm asking you to do.